Hey everybody, welcome back. Good to see you guys. Just getting the live stream started. Decided to set up in a different part of the house today. Hope you guys are doing well and having a great finals week so far. Today's the last day for a review session, so we're just going to try and go through the rest of the study guide. And then Thursday, as you guys know, is the day of the final. So we're just finishing out this class strong, trying to sprint to the finish, and got a little bit more of these notes that we want to review from the study guide, so you should try to pull that up if you don't already have it up. Today we're using the second one, the one for everything that comes after the midterm. So thank you guys for being here. I know it'll help you a lot to get the review in and to participate in the review session, so that's the plan anyway. And if you're here, feel free to say hi. Welcome to everybody. Good morning. Got some coffee here, so getting things started, hopefully on a good note. Sorry, there's a little, because of the natural light streaming in from behind me, it's probably making me appear a little dim on the screen. I don't know, but you'll be able to hear my voice, and I'll try my best to see if anything can affect that. Maybe if I tilt the laptop down a little bit like that, it's a bit better. Cool. Just it's 11:10 is when class starts, so we've got a few minutes of downtime to just sort of chill until it's class. Hi, Carmen. Good to see you. Just a couple of us here for now, but definitely welcome back. Last, I guess, live stream meeting of the semester. So completed our journey. Been a very interesting and treacherous journey in a lot of ways this semester for everybody. But we're still here, so better days ahead, and just going to come out stronger in the end. But yeah, thank you guys for all your hard work and dedication. Hope you guys have some fun summer plans or something lined up. I know that a lot of summer plans have probably been changed up, but hopefully at a minimum you get a good chance to rest, spend some time with close family and friends, stay productive, and you'll transition right into the fall, hitting the ground running. So I think we have a good group, so I'm sure you guys will make the best of it. Hi there. How's it going? Good to see you, Brian. Okay, a couple more minutes. Hi, Tuan. Good to see you. Be right back. 1 second. Thank you. Hey. I'm just curious, does this work? No, not with the light glare. So that would have been cool, but not to be. Hey there. Hi, Sebastian. Good to see you. All right. Okay, just about a minute to go, and then we'll go through this last study session, this last review session. Hi, Veronica. All right, so there's a few seconds until, hey, Maddie, good to see you too. A few seconds until it's the official class time, but I think just to get things going promptly, I want to know this. When we finished last time our first part one of the review session, I know that we were somewhere in the middle of the last chunk of questions on chapter 4 about knowledge, and so like the first midterm review sheet. If anybody could tell me, if you know, what number that we kind of finished with last time, then I could just pick up from there and take us through the rest of those notes. So anybody at all, if you can, obviously, let me know which topic or question in that section referring to knowledge and its limits, which one of those did we kind of finish with? And then I can easily complete the discussion of the first bundle of notes from the midterm review sheet. So let me know, which was the number? Because right on Thursday of last week, the 14th, we were doing this kind of break it up into individual responses, one for each student, and we went through a whole bundle of those. But we didn't quite finish the first half of the midterm review sheet. So that's why I would like to know who could tell me that. Otherwise, there's a way to find out. We could always just go back to the tape and play it. But you guys are the ones participating in the review, so I think you'd maybe know. Who knows that? Hey, Bill. Everyone heard my question? I'm just asking where we start. Where do we start? Where are we going to start right now? Just tell me what number we finished on last time, and then I'll just pick right up from there, and then we'll go through all the notes. But I do want to know where to start because I don't want to just go over the information a second time if we already did it once. So just let me know what's that answer. Or I'll just take requests, but I need some kind of feedback from you. So just let me know which one you want to start with. I mean, we should start with the one that we left off with at the last meeting. So give me that. Let me know. It's a question I'm posing to you, so thank you. Reviewed the remaining questions of chapter 4. I did. Oh yeah, Sebastian, maybe that's right. So I like ran through them quickly at the end. Isn't that true? Is that how it went? My memory is a little bit off about the last portion of the meeting because I know that we were running to the end. But if that's true and we completed all of them, then not to worry. We're going to then just start with the second half. Last few questions from part 1 we didn't get to, but I am not 100% sure if you went through the rest of part 1. Well, good, Carmen. Okay, yeah. I just wanted the feedback from you because I kind of forgot that, but that's good. Okay, so we have covered everything from chapter 4 and the whole first half study guide. So then now we're going to pick up where we left off by going into the post-midterm review sheet. Okay, so this is a document that I've mailed all you guys already last week. If you don't have it pulled up, then I would just ask that you go and view, download, or print it from the Canvas notification that I sent last week. And so therefore, yeah, thank you guys. So post-midterm review, we're starting with chapter 5, and we're going to just talk about all the topics on this list. So I'm just going to kind of go over them with you guys. Let me know if there's something you want me to slow down on or repeat or clarify in better detail. But we're just going to start at the top, okay? So the first question says, what is a fallacy? All right, so a fallacy is when there's a logical error or a flaw in an argument. So it's a logically flawed argument where because of the logical error, the premises don't provide the right kind of support for the conclusion. So it's a weak, faulty, defective argument. It's an argument containing a logical flaw. So when an argument has such a logical flaw or defect, it is considered to have a fallacy. So fallacy, logical flaw or error in an argument, making the argument weak. Okay. After that, the question says, what is a fallacy of ambiguity? Fallacy of ambiguity is when the type of logical error or flaw in the argument is that it contains ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. So it's a name for a category of fallacies under which 5 items fall, but that category of fallacies, the fallacies of ambiguity, that just means that they contain, again, ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. All right? Next, it's asking, so now this is all about fallacies, chapter 5. So every question has to do with some of that. Now there's just a whole range of individual items. So equivocation is one of the fallacies of ambiguity. Equivocation is the fallacy where there's a key term in the argument, but it appears more than once, and the meaning of that term changes midway through the argument. So, like, if I told you that John's at the bank, and the bank is where you can deposit money, so John is at a place where you can deposit money, it seems like a fair enough, valid argument. But if we're equivocating on the meaning of the word bank, like in the first case we mean food bank, and in the second case, of course, we mean financial bank, then the conclusion wouldn't follow because the term bank has been used in different non-identical ways. So that's equivocation and just an example, okay? All right, so then it's amphibole. The fallacy of amphibole is just whenever there's like a grammatical ambiguity in a statement or an argument, and that means that you're not sure what conclusion to draw. So if somebody said that John and Bill were talking about his car, we just don't know whose car is the subject of the discussion because it says John and Bill were talking about his car. But those are two individual male subjects, and the singular plural pronoun his, sorry, the singular, I did not mean to say plural, the singular pronoun his could ambiguously refer to either of the two subjects. And so that would be like one example. Sometimes like a different type of pronoun, like a plural reference, like they. The boys wanted to watch the basketball team, but they were too tired. You understand? Like in that case, it's not clear who they refers to. It could be that the basketball team was too tired to perform, or the boys were too tired to go watch them. So, examples like that would be amphibole. Okay, next. So I'm just going to kind of talk through these today. I think that's just how I feel like doing it at this particular meeting. If that's anything that's problematic or something you want me to review again, just definitely let me know. The interactive version of this is always best, but I want to make sure we get through all the concepts before the final. So that's why I'm going to just kind of make sure we go through each one. Okay, so then the fallacy of of accent. That's when the meaning of an argument changes based on which word is emphasized in the argument or the statement. So like if somebody says, I wasn't, so your mom's like, don't walk across the street when the light says to stop. And the kid did cross the street. And the parent's like, why'd you do that? And say, oh, you said don't walk across the street. But as you can see, I was skipping and hopping all the way through the intersection. Like that would be a deliberate way of misinterpreting the parent's warning or rule as though they just meant don't specifically walk, but any other mode of locomotion across the street would be permitted. So, that's an accent fallacy, and you can imagine other possibilities too. Fallacy of division. Okay, so that happens when a claim is made that because a whole group or category has a certain property, that each member of the category has that property too, but that's not always true. So like the United States is the wealthiest nation, and I'm a part of the United States, so therefore I'm the wealthiest person. That doesn't necessarily follow. So what's true of the whole is not always true of each part of the whole. Right? The hotel is huge. Room 101 is a room of the hotel, so the room is huge. Not necessarily. You can have a big hotel made out of small individual rooms. So division is when you illegitimately infer that each part of a set has the same qualities that the set has. Okay? All right. The opposite of that would be the composition fallacy, which is where you do it in the opposite direction, and you say that because one member of a certain set of things has a feature, that therefore the whole category has it too. But that's also not true. So like John is homeless and very poor, and John is a United States citizen, so the United States is very poor. That, of course, would not be true. So that would be to, reach a conclusion about a whole thing that one thing is a part of, but the part doesn't have the same features that the whole has. The atoms in my body cannot be seen without a microscope. Therefore, I cannot be seen without a microscope, which is clearly false. So those are different examples of division and composition, right? So now that we've done that, we've covered all the fallacies of ambiguity. So the next bundle of them are the fallacies of relevance, okay? So a fallacy of relevance, first of all, the question, what is a fallacy of relevance? This is a category of fallacies where their problem is that the premises are not like logically relevant or related to the conclusion, and that makes the argument weak. So it's an argument where the first one of those. Ad hominem sometimes is also called personal attack fallacy. That's basically when instead of attacking your opponent's position and argument, you attack them in personal terms. So someone tries to argue to you that, I don't know, they say public health is more important than economic concerns, therefore we should have a longer shutdown. And somebody says, well, of course you would say that because, you don't even have a job, so why do you really care? But that makes it personal, right? That's saying to the individual, I'm not focused on your argument, I'm focused on your circumstances and why you make the argument, or, So that would be a personal attack fallacy. Hi, Chris. So as you know, Chris, we're just going through the study guide and I'm talking about each different question in it. So we're at number 10 now, appeal to force. Okay, so that is sometimes called the scare tactic fallacy. You're trying to scare somebody basically into accepting your view by either intimidating them, threatening them, or just straight up actually using force of some kind. So someone makes the argument to you that, we need to reduce emissions to tackle global warming, or else coastal regions will be underwater in 100 years. And then somebody says, look, I don't think you should be holding that argument because you work for me and I pay your check. You're on my payroll, so you probably should stop saying that. Now, in that case, it's the employer threatening the employee with the termination of employment if they continue to press an argument. But you're not supposed to just scare people or threaten them into accepting your views. You're supposed to make an argument which demonstrates through reason that the view that you hold is correct and that theirs is not. So that would be the appeal to force. Okay, next it's appeal to pity. It's pretty simple. It's just whenever you try to use pity to get by or win an argument, but in the situation it is not relevant to the conclusion. So somebody could say, I'm really sorry that I stole all these things, but I'm sorry that I committed theft. But when I was a little kid, my parents, they never let me play outside, and they were very strict. So I kind of developed a psychological complex around kleptomania, and that's the real reason. So don't blame me, blame my parents. But in that case, you're giving a sad story, which may be even true, but it's not really relevant to the question of whether it's a merited and just response to theft to punish or penalize the person. You say to the cop, "Oh, don't give me a ticket because I just got out of a breakup or whatever," right? So trying to rely on sympathetic special treatment by invoking pity or emotion. Okay, popular appeal. That is another one of these fallacies of relevance. Popular appeal is when you try to use the popularity of something in order to try and win an argument. So you say, I don't know, Zoom is the best platform right now to do live casts on because most of the people do use it. Or, Apple iPhones are way better than the Android smartphones because most people have those iPhones. So saying something's good, right, or true requires an argument. Why? Not just saying because it's popular. Because if it has deserved popularity, then that'll be based on the positive features that it has in and of itself. Okay, so popular appeal. Next, there's appeal to ignorance. So appeal to ignorance fallacy is when you basically say something's true just because no one can prove otherwise. Aliens exist because you can't prove they don't. Bigfoot exists because there's no way to truly prove that he does not, or the Loch Ness Monster. Or somebody says, like, for example, this unproven medical treatment works for a certain disease just because I haven't seen definitive proof that it does not. So in all of those different examples, that would be the fallacy of appeal to ignorance. To show that something's true, you can't just say no one has proven that it's false. You have to have actual confirming supporting evidence, not the absence of contrary evidence. Okay? Like if somebody said, I think you're cheating on me because you can't prove to me that you're not. It's impossible to prove a negative. So in a way, those are all examples. All right, good. So hasty generalization. Hasty generalization fallacy, that's the one where you jump to a conclusion too quickly based on limited evidence or a biased sample. So, you had, one pit bull attack that you read about in the news. So you hastily generalize and say all pit bulls are killers. Or, you had one, negative experience with a police officer, and so you're like, police force is corrupt. Sweeping generalized claims about all things require substantial evidence. Therefore, you're not really entitled to a claim like that just based on a couple of cases. To make such claims with credibility, with justification, you need a much more substantial base of examples and experiences. Okay, so it's next. Everybody still with me? Just making sure. You can let me know if so. Hopefully it's coming through clearly. I don't want to go too fast or too slow, so just let me know if anything's at all could be improved. But all right. Next we've got straw man. Wait, am I getting that right now? Yeah, I am. Okay, so yeah, straw man. What is straw man? Straw man is when you, thank you guys. So straw man is when you take your opponent's actual argument and then you mischaracterize it so that it sounds worse, pretty much. So somebody gives you a reasonable argument why maybe school closures should continue through the fall, just for the sake of caution regarding the transmission of the coronavirus. And then they say, oh, so let me understand what you're saying. We should just shut down schools permanently and students will never ever learn, and so our society will collapse because we'll have an uneducated workforce. How can you say we should permanently shut down school? That's a crazy thing to say. But that would be an exaggeration of the person's actual statement, because they're just talking about, restrictions continuing through the fall term, since the pandemic's still not fully well under control. I'm not saying whether I think this is a good or bad argument, but just the point is you can understand someone taking someone's view and distorting it or exaggerating it beyond, or oversimplifying it in a way that's not accurate to the original intent. Maybe if somebody said, oh, well, economic necessity requires that we have at least some kind of return to normal business in the short term. And then if somebody said to them, oh, so what you're saying is we should just let people go to concerts and, like massage parlors and stuff, close contact between each other, that's really irresponsible. But maybe that's a distortion of their view if they argued for a very kind of responsible, limited return to normal activity. Okay. So, yes, what's next? Red herring. Red herring is when you try to distract from the main topic of the conversation or discussion and to switch topics to something else that sounds more favorable to you. So, like if somebody said, global warming is the biggest problem that we're facing right now, and that's why we should slash our reduction in carbon emissions. And then somebody says, I don't really think that's true, because have you looked at this coronavirus? That's the main problem. Now we're talking about different topics, though. You got to stick with the same topic before we move on to something else. So sometimes people will do that. They'll try to throw you off by changing the subject. That's a red herring. And that's, seen a lot of times in everyday speech and the media and in politics too. Okay. So now we are asking about what is a fallacy of unwarranted assumption. So fallacy of unwarranted assumption is when the argument contains claims that are not based on good evidence. So the premises are not supported by justified reason or evidence. And so what are some of those? One is begging the question. Begging the question is a fallacy that happens when one of the premises of the argument is a reworded version of the conclusion. So like the conclusion and at least one premise are the same statement in slightly different terms. Like if I say to you that the Lakers are the best basketball team, and you say, well, what's the argument? And I say, okay, well, here's basically the argument, because if you look at the league, out of all the teams, there's no team that's better than them. Therefore, they're the best. Now, that's just the same statement. To say they're the best is the same to say that there's none better. Or like if I say I'm older than you, that's the same as saying you're younger than me. It's just a different way of stating it by switching up the subject of the comparison. So that would be a bad argument, right? To know why they're the best team, if they are, you'd have to make an argument which doesn't just repeat the claim that they're the best, therefore they're the best. Okay? Abortion is wrong because it's wrong to end a pregnancy, or the death penalty is justified because it's okay to execute a citizen when they've committed a capital crime. So those would all just be different examples of how, this fallacy could play out in a real case. Okay, so we're going to inappropriate appeal to authority, right? So inappropriate appeal to authority is just when you're trying to refer to somebody's opinion to support your argument, but the problem is that the person who you're trying to gain support from is not even an expert or knowledgeable on that subject. So if you say like, my auto mechanic guy was telling me that the best thing to do to prevent the coronavirus is to drink bleach, you would say, well, this is not an expert at all. And so therefore, the auto mechanic, you should stay in his lane and just tell me about what's wrong with my car. But if he's going to try and offer medical advice, that's where it's not the right kind of authority. And if you said, well, that's the reason that it's true, then you'd be committing this fallacy. So there's all kinds of times where a person's expertise doesn't exist or it's in a different area. And in those situations, that's not a credible basis for a conclusion, okay? So then, loaded question, all right? Loaded question is simply asking a question which assumes something you don't know. Like if I ask you, probably you're too young to ask this question, but suppose a person of a certain age is asked, who did you vote for in the last election? Could that be a loaded question? It could be, because it assumes the person did vote, and the question is simply about who did they choose. So you'd have to know they voted before you were in a position to ask that question. Or what's your major? You know, that could be a loaded question. Maybe you haven't chosen one, or maybe you're not even a student. Who are you dating? And maybe the person doesn't date anyone, or whatever. So those are loaded questions. Just make sure that you don't ask presumptuous questions which assume things about the subject of the question that you're not aware of. Okay. From there, there's false dilemma. False dilemma is when a complex situation is oversimplified so it seems like there's only two choices, but really there's more than two. Like if I said to you right now, what's your view? Do you think we should have complete return to normal business, or that we should shut down this economy for another 2 years? You could argue, well, that's a false dilemma, because it's possible to have a moderate middle ground in between those two extreme different choices. Or I don't know, maybe someone says, are you a cat person or a dog person? And you're like, neither one. I love fish or something else, you know, a horse person, or, you know, whatever other pets, have an iguana, right? So false dilemma can be seen in ways where the situations are oversimplified to just two strong alternatives. Love it or leave it. What do you think about America? Another false dilemma, because it's possible that the person is just ambivalent and somewhere in the middle between these passionate attitudes of love and hate. Okay. Questionable cause, everybody. So the questionable cause fallacy happens when you assume that something is the cause of something else, but there's not very good evidence for that. So like, I don't know, you're superstitious and you drop a mirror. As some people may know, there's like a myth that breaking a mirror is like 7 years of bad luck. So you break the mirror and then some negative life event happens, like you fail an exam, or a friend of yours gets into an accident or something, or you do. And then you say, oh, I knew it. It was because I broke the mirror first, and then this was the cause of the effect that happened later. But that's not really reliable or good evidence. It's just because the first thing happened first, but there's no essential connection between the two things. So that would be questionable cause. Okay, so next up, the slippery slope. Slippery slope fallacy is when, so somebody makes this assumption that if one type of action is going to be either allowed or just taken, that will eventually lead to further and further actions of that kind, and all actions of that kind being either taken or allowed. Yeah? So like if somebody says, maybe we should expand the definition of marriage to include same-sex couples, somebody might argue, oh, well, that's the first step on a slippery slope. Tomorrow it'll be marriage to your relatives, marriage to your pets, marriage to your household appliances, you know, and we don't want that, so don't take the first step. But of course, as we've seen through the establishment of that practice, it hasn't had any of these kind of really weird and disturbing side effect consequences. The gateway drug, someone says if you take like a little sip of whatever wine or beer, it may seem like just a little thing to experiment with, but it puts you on a slippery slope towards complete addiction, homelessness, and dropping out of society, school, and everything else, and going to jail. So don't even try once. That could be a slippery slope argument too. So sometimes overhyped negative predictions based on only one probably inconsequential action can be made, and that would be slippery slope. Okay, then last from that section is the naturalistic fallacy, guys. So naturalistic fallacy is when somebody says that whatever's natural has to be good and whatever's unnatural is bad and wrong. So they may say, look, vaccine, that's something developed in a lab. It's not coming from nature, so it's bad. But I don't know, organic fruits and vegetables, not produced through pesticides or other industrialized agricultural processes, that's better. Maybe somebody thinks like a homeopathic treatment for cancer is good for you because it's natural, but getting chemo would be really bad for you because that's based on man-made technology. But obviously, the science has it otherwise in terms of the effectiveness of these methods of treatment. So, you have to take a case-by-case look at something to determine whether it's good or bad. Some things that are from nature are not good for us, like earthquakes, hurricanes, viruses that come out of the world. And some things that are man-made are good for us, like vaccines, medicines, technologies, communication systems, and everything else. Okay. I've always kind of thought also, this is a little more philosophical. I don't want to burden you too much with this thought, but what is natural? It's kind of a tough question. If you see bees making beehives, you don't look at the beehive and you're like, what? That's not natural, because the bees make it. That's part of their life cycle, and that's part of their species, right? Now we're humans, and so we don't make big beehive, but we make highways and buildings and technologies. So how is that not natural? It's just the output from the species that we are. But anyway, I digress. So after that, we're on the chapter 10 and 11. There's only a few questions on that stuff. That's all the media. And I really focused mostly on that part of the class and having you guys complete your homework 3 and 4, finding fallacies and ads, and then writing your media critical analysis. So I just have a few questions on that. What is media literacy? The ability to understand and evaluate the influence of the media on us, right? So just being able to critically analyze, understand, and evaluate the effect of the media on you. What is product placement? Product placement is when the advertiser places the product itself in the programming instead of during a standard commercial or intermission. So like during whatever, like the TV show, like on American Idol or something, they're actually drinking Coca-Cola in view of the camera. This is a hidden endorsement and advertising slot for the Coca-Cola brand, which is put into the program. Therefore, you can't really avoid it if you want to consume this program. It's in the programming, and so it's not something you can skip. Next up, 3 main purposes of ads. Okay, so one is to just inform consumers about the product or service, let you know what the product or service does and why it's something good for them. Another is just to create awareness of the product or the brand, right? And another is to stimulate demand for it. And these 3 functions, although they're logically distinct, they can sometimes be combined. Okay, so it's awareness of the product, inform you about the service, or stimulate demand for it. Okay, that now takes us into the chapter 12 questions. So if you're all following me, I'm on the part of the review guide that says chapter 12, science versus pseudoscience. Okay, so first of all, it says explain the assumption of unity. Okay, so there are certain basic assumptions that science makes. One of them is the assumption that the universe is orderly and predictable. But I'm sorry, I'm referring to the unity assumption. So the unity assumption is that there's an underlying unity in the universe such that everything could be explained according to one set of scientific laws and principles. Thank you, Veronica. Yes, good to know. So since the universe is one coherent, unified place, it should be capable of explanation through one overarching set of scientific natural laws. So there should be one set of scientific laws that could explain everything, because the universe is a unified system. Okay, limitations of science. One is that it can only study the things that are observable. Okay, so if there's something unobservable, like if there were ghosts or, God or something, then that might be something that couldn't be explored through science. So it can only understand and theorize about the things that can be physically observed in some way. It also is limited because it assumes that the universe is predictable, which, although we do assume, we cannot absolutely know for sure. And another thing is that it assumes that the external world itself just exists, which of course we all take for granted and pretty much know, but we cannot prove beyond absolute doubt. Okay, so then, what's the scientific method? So there's a couple of questions about the scientific method. This is the one that's just asking about the overarching, like all the full steps. It's the process where you start by identifying a problem through observing the world. You create a hypothesis which tries to explain the existence or the occurrence of that event, and then you try and test the hypothesis to see if it's actually the correct explanation. So from there, how is the three-tiered model of critical thinking similar to the scientific method? So in the critical thinking process, there's experience, interpretation, and analysis. And those are sort of similar to observation, hypothesis, and test. So the experience stage of critical thinking is when you just point out what happened. Some experience happened, you just note what it was, but you're not yet figuring out why or how it happened, just what happened. After that, though, you give an interpretation of why. You try and think, why could it have happened? What's the reason? Now, those two steps right there are similar to the science process, where you start by identifying a problem that you don't have an understanding of yet or why it happens. So that's identifying the problem, just what it is. That's kind of like experience. When you give a hypothesis to explain the observed problem, that's like an interpretation. That's like trying to interpret the reason why the thing had happened. Now, the third step of both, in the critical thinking process, it's analysis. That's when you revisit the interpretation and allow the possibility that it could be modified if there's a better interpretation. When you test a hypothesis, it's similar because you are now going to try and see if this is the correct hypothesis or if there could be a better one. All right, so those are the three kind of major elements of each one and how they're somewhat similar to each other. Okay. So first step of science method, identify a problem. So that's just when you go out in the world and you observe the world and you identify some thing, some phenomenon that is not currently understood. So looking in the world and noting that there's an event or a fact that's not exactly comprehended yet why it happened. Science wants to try and provide an answer as to why it happened, but we got to start by just finding something that we need to explain. Okay, so that's identifying a problem through observation, some unexplained phenomena. It could be the fact that water levels are rising, or that bees seem to be in global decline, or it could have to do with any number of other phenomena that we want to have understanding of. Okay. So then, second step, identify a hypothesis. Develop an initial hypothesis. Sorry. So when you develop an initial hypothesis, you try and provide an educated scientific guess to explain the occurrence of the observed problem. So that's just where you try and explain or state the reason why the thing that you noted in the first step has happened. So if bees are declining, now you're going to try and say, why could that be happening? Is it because of fill in the blank? Is it because of changing weather patterns across the globe due to global temperature increase? Does it have to do with the emission of 5G cell phone tower radiation? Does it have to do with maybe some pathogen that only affects the bees, like a virus that's specific to the insect world? So an explanation could be supplied or attempted anyway. That's the second step. After that, it says fourth step, test the hypothesis. So at that step, you basically would try and generate either a real world or a laboratory procedure to determine whether the hypothesis is true or false, right? So you have to kind of create a controlled set of conditions which can be used to determine whether your hypothesis is true or not. If you thought that 5G cell phone towers were killing off the bees, then perhaps you could provide or create an experiment which would expose some bees to that and not others, and then just see whether the predicted effect did materialize or not. Okay, so a test is just basically trying to verify whether the hypothesis is true by means of a controlled experiment that you do in the real world or in a lab. The fifth step, evaluate the hypothesis based on the results of the test. Okay, so you did your experiment, and that's going to reveal one of two things. It's either going to lend credibility to the hypothesis by confirming it, or it's going to show that the predicted results of the hypothesis didn't happen. And in that case, the test fails to confirm the hypothesis, and it kind of disqualifies it. So if it's the first, the hypothesis has been verified or confirmed by the test, then you would publish the results, and you hope that the remaining part of the scientific community can continue to replicate the results, giving it even more justification. But if the hypothesis is disconfirmed by the experiment, then in that case, you've got to go back to the step of creating a new hypothesis, so step 2, and then run through the procedure again until eventually you have a hypothesis which is confirmed by the outcome of the test. Okay, so the test either confirms or disconfirms. If it confirms, you publish it and see if it can be replicated. If it doesn't confirm it, that would be the time where you're going to withdraw that hypothesis and go back to the drawing board, try to create a new one. Okay. So then it says, explain the criteria of relevance to the problem when you evaluate a hypothesis. So one quality of a good scientific hypothesis is that it would be relevant to the problem that you're trying to understand. So it has to at least be in the same topic, on the same subject, relatable to the subject that you're trying to investigate. So like if you had an observed problem that had to do with like the physical sciences, but your explanation of it, the hypothesis, had to do with the social sciences, that would be completely irrelevant. So make sure that the hypothesis, whatever it is that tries to explain the problem, relates to that problem. Okay. Next up, predictive power. So another quality of a good scientific theory or hypothesis is if it has predictive power, which means that a good scientific theory can be used to accurately predict future events of the same kind. So, you know, we have good theories of how the science of weather works in the field of meteorology. That allows us to produce pretty accurate predictions of the weather forecast. We have a pretty good understanding of astronomy, which is the celestial motions of planets, stars, and other things in the cosmos. And because we know those things with great precision, we can make very accurate predictions of when the next lunar or solar eclipse will happen. So predictive power adds and enhances the credibility of a scientific theory. Okay. Copernicus. Who's Copernicus? So Nicolas Copernicus was the Polish astronomer who basically discovered heliocentrism in the 15th century, more or less. So heliocentrism is the position that the sun's at the center of the solar system here. Before him, it was widely believed that the Earth was the center of everything, which was called the Geocentric Model. That was a favored view of the church because the belief was that God would not have wanted something as important as the world that we live on as humans to be somewhere random. So he would want it to be in the middle because we're the children of God created in his image. Finding out that the sun was at the center was disturbing to the beliefs of the church and the orthodox views of the Christian church. So that was a revolutionary moment in science, definitely considered by many to be a touchstone event in the history of science in the West. Okay, so he discovered heliocentrism, replaced geocentrism, departs from the church's view. Okay, materialism in science. Materialism is a view in science. It's a basic assumption of science that everything in the whole universe is just made out of physical matter, even including consciousness and the mind. So according to materialism, we're all just physical objects. Me, you, and all the things around us are all just made out of atoms. And there's nothing to it besides that. So according to materialism, there's no ghosts, there's no souls or spirits, there's just brains and bodies, flesh and blood, and everything's made out of matter. Okay. What is science? That's question 13 in this part of the review guide. Science is just a method of, so it's to provide testable explanations for observed phenomena. So trying to reason from observed problems to testable explanations for those problems. So you observe the world, you find things that are not understood or explained, and then you try and provide explanations for them which could be tested. So reasoning from observed problems to testable explanations for them. Okay. So science and religion. I probably should have been a little more precise in the way I stated the topic here, but what I'm asking about is what could be different views about the relationship of the two. That's something I think I asked on the last quiz that you guys all took on science. So when it comes to science and religion, people do not all agree on which one should hold sway over the other when they don't see eye to eye. Some people say that when science and religion do disagree, when they can't come to terms on something, it's science that you should go with. So like if science says evolution and religion says creation, a person who thinks that science should be prioritized when they conflict would say evolution is true. Another view, though, is the opposite, saying that if science and religion don't agree, that it should be religion that is given priority. If that's the case, then you would say, I reject evolution and I hold to the view of creationism. Another possibility is that they deal with different topics. So if that's what you think, then they really don't even have any disagreements because they're talking about completely separate things. Religion's there for our moral lives and our spiritual lives. And science is there just to give us physical explanations of the phenomena around us and cause-effect explanations, so they don't intrude on each other's turf. A fourth view would be that that they're actually compatible, so that they don't disagree. They only seem to do that because you don't interpret them properly. But if you interpret it in the correct way, then you'd see that saying the same thing. So when God said, I created man in my own image, maybe that just meant that he created the conditions for evolution to produce man in its own image over a very long scale of time. Or maybe in the Bible when it says that God created the universe in 7 days, but the scientists say it took billions of years for mankind to emerge. Maybe a day doesn't literally mean a day. So that's another way of trying to finesse the differences between them to interpret religion in a way that makes them all compatible. Okay. Next up. A scientific theory. So a scientific theory is just a very well-established scientific hypothesis. It's when a hypothesis has been confirmed over and over again by many different people in different settings that confers the status of theory on the hypothesis, which means that it's kind of like the hypothesis has graduated to a level of being regarded as demonstrated and therefore very likely to be true. So a theory starts off as a hypothesis, and through the procedure of it getting confirmed so many different times, it attains the status of theory, which is just well-established hypothesis. Okay, now, scientific hypothesis in general is just an educated scientific guess to explain a problem that you've identified or a phenomena that you have observed. So, question 17. Explain the step of the scientific method of gaining or gathering additional information to refine the hypothesis. That is that step 3 that was mentioned in the book, which in my own view I thought was perhaps unnecessary to state, but not to worry. So it just means that sometimes when you start off with a hypothesis, you realize then that you might need to make a slight change to it. So like suppose there was a hypothesis that said social media increases depression, right? So like one thing that has been observed is that young people, Generation Z, seem to be exhibiting like higher levels perhaps of depression than previous generations, maybe like the millennials did. And what could be the reason for that? Some people argue that it might have to do with our increased dependence on social media and the role that it plays in our lives. But suppose that as you started to develop that hypothesis and you collected data, you started to notice that it's not just any social media sites, but only the ones that focus on, I don't know, sharing photos, so like Instagram or whatever. Then your hypothesis has been refined. It started off as social media leads to depression. Now it's been a little bit tweaked and narrowed down to specific types of social media sites could lead to that. So anyway, I'm giving you an example to help you understand the question, which is, what does it mean to refine a hypothesis after you gather initial data? It means you start with a hypothesis, and then maybe you're going to just modify it a little bit after you start to look into the facts. Okay? So that's number 17 there. Next up, consistency with established theories. All right, so a good scientific theory or hypothesis will fit in with others. It will not contradict them because they're all supposed to kind of form one cohesive structure of knowledge. So a good scientific hypothesis is not going to just knock out other things that have already been well proven before. It's going to build on them. It's going to fit in with them like a puzzle piece. So that would be the point there. Okay. Next up, falsifiability. What that means is that the theory is capable of being proven false. That's a good thing, because only if it's somehow able to be proven false can it be tested and verified to be true. You see, to test something means that you don't know if it's true or false, and the test will tell you which one that is. But if the test cannot show you that it's false because there's no way to show that it's false, then there's no way to test it either. So like with astrology, the horoscopes, they don't say perform a scientific experiment, and if this is the result of it, that means that it's false. They just say take it for granted that it's true, and no, you can't disprove it. So that's unscientific. A real scientific theory says, here's what would happen if this was false, and so go and check and see if that happens or not. But if you don't even know how to determine that question, then it's not something that can be tested, and therefore it's outside the whole scope of science. Got to be able to prove it false. Doesn't mean that it is false, doesn't mean that it will be proven false. It means you know what to look for in case it was false. Okay, so next up, the concept of simplicity, sometimes known as Occam's razor. What that is saying is that if you have different explanations for one fact or event, and one of them is simpler than the other, the simpler of the two explanations for the same event is the likelier one to be true. Okay, so to assume that like the moon landing is real is much simpler than assuming that it's fake. To assume that the planet is a sphere is much simpler than assuming that it's a flat disk. Because for the planet to be a flat disk, there would be so many additional assumptions we would have to make. We'd have to assume like something about where the ships go when they appear to reach the edge, how satellites function. But all those things are easily explicable on the spherical hypothesis. So when it comes to the shape of the Earth, one theory is simpler than the other one. And that's how it just works generally across the board. So when you have two explanations for something, go with the simpler one. That's the likelier one to be true. Okay. Next up, predictability. So an assumption of science is that the universe is orderly as a whole structure. So because we're living in this orderly system, the physical universe, which has got order in it, that means it's predictable. So when we've got a cause and effect relationship that we've understood, that we've been able to establish, that will never change. That's going to continue. That will hold forever. So gravity and the way that it would cause this marker to drop, that will continue to happen forever if the same physical conditions are reproduced, because natural laws don't change. That's what this is the assumption of. It's a predictable world. So you can just count on that marker to fall, not just today, not just now, but for all time, anywhere it happens in a similar set of physical conditions. Okay, objectivity. The assumption of objectivity is that the world we live in is objective, and we can discover objective facts and truth about it, so we can learn about it how it really is. Not just how it appears to be, but how it really, really is, and we can do that with no bias. So it's the belief that a scientist holds that we're not just talking about our feelings and ideas. We're talking about actual reality, that we can discover how reality is in itself with no bias at all. Okay. So next up, I've got pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is just fake science. It's just something that wants to look like it's scientific, but it's really not. So this textbook defines it as a body of explanations that masquerades as science in an attempt to gain legitimacy, but it's not really scientific. So it's a body of explanations, not just one claim like aliens exist. It's a body of explanations. So it's got to be something that people would regard as a field: numerology, astrology, tarot card readings, crystal ball gazing, psychic predictions. These are all pseudoscientific. They don't involve falsifiable claims. They don't involve new experiments that are conducted to test their credibility. So yeah, those would all be pseudoscience. Fake science, something trying to appear as scientific, but it's really not. And those would be some examples. Sir Francis Bacon, he's a British philosopher of the 16th century who basically created the scientific method that we talked about just now. So he's a major player in the history of science because he created the scientific method. Okay, and then the last one from that whole chapter of 12 is what's empiricism? It's a question that appears both halves of the class. So anyway, it's just the view that the five senses are the primary source of human knowledge, that most human knowledge comes from the physical five senses and observation. So it mostly comes from the things you can see, taste, touch, hear, and smell. Okay, so then after that, we're down to our last chapter of notes, the stuff that we most recently covered, which is chapter 9 and ethics. So there's just a couple questions in there, so let me just try to talk to you about that stuff. First of all, what's ethics? Ethics is the study of morality and moral concepts. So it's the whole field of study concerned with morality. And morality has to do with right and wrong, good and bad, moral and immoral, what you should or shouldn't do, etc. Okay, moral reasoning. That's the second one on that list. Moral reasoning is when you are the judge making a decision about what's right or wrong or what you should or should not do. Okay, so when you judge an action or a behavior in a moral way, or you think a little bit about what you should be doing morally or not doing, you're engaging in moral reasoning right there. 3 types of moral action. Okay, so there's morally impermissible. It means it's wrong and it's not okay to do. Like, I don't know, killing people or committing rape or something. Morally permissible. That means that it's not wrong and it is okay to do. Like watching a lecture like this, or going for a jog, or donating blood or something, I guess. Morally permissible. And then the third category is morally obligatory, which means that it's not even that you may do it, it's that you must do it, and it would be wrong not to do it. Like paying for the bill after you've been served your food, or keeping a promise that you made to a person in all sincerity. So yeah, there's 3 types of moral actions. Some are things you must do, some are things you may, and some are things that you may not do. Okay, moral values. Moral values are values that are good for you and for others, and they are considered good for their own sake, even if they don't